Good morning, Penn State. Good morning, Mac admins. Hello to all the ships at sea watching on YouTube. Thank you for joining this lovely morning. A little excitement. Yeah, it's a good day, good day. Good day. Excellent. I am Sean Rabbitt. I am a senior consulting engineer for identity and access management. It's a fancy way of saying that I read manuals and then rewrite them so that way you can ignore them. It's perfectly fine. I appreciate all the stuff that you do to help support us all in the community. Thank you for being here. One quick note, you're going to see the word Jamf on an awful lot of these slides. You're going to see the fact that I work for Jamf. However, the opinions expressed in this presentation are very much not necessarily those of the Jamf Corporation, its officers, employees, or anyone with an intelligence level above me. Which is pretty low. So I apologize in advance if I have strong opinions. They are not necessarily those of Jamf, but hopefully we will be able to get there in the end and see why I have these opinions. So today, Max Factor. No, we're not talking about makeup. Sorry, for those of you who are Karina Longworth fans, we are not going to be going into the history of long-forgotten stories of Hollywood today. We are going to be talking about the wonderful world of single sign-on extensions and their various forms and how to secure your devices because you're going to be using them. So I always like to start off my presentations at the very beginning and go into some basics. So good old Carl said we need to go through some basics at the beginning to set a baseline of what the heck am I talking about, and more importantly, why did I call this thing Max Factor? Well, authentication factors. What is an authentication factor type? So we'll start at the beginning. Generally, we've been using three different types of authentication factors for accessing our devices throughout history. It could be something like a possession-based factor. I literally have a key in order to get into this building. It could be a knowledge-based factor. Here's the secret password in order to get into the club or the speakeasy. Or a biometric is the newest, latest, greatest. I look just like this, so therefore I must be the person that lets me in. It's something you know, something you have, and something that you are. So beyond that, we go into what does that translate in computer worlds. Well, something you know is something like a PIN, a password, your mother's maiden name, something like that. Something that you have is usually a physical device. So it'll be something like a YubiKey or a smart card or a FIDO key or, yep, I still have it in my pocket, I still got it. Some other device like that. CAC cards, something with a chip on it or a certificate that verifies that I'm actually me. Lastly, for biometrics in the Apple world here, we've got ye old Face ID. Yep, I'm still me. I got Touch ID, which I can throw on my nice new modern computers. I got fingerprint scanners. I got retinal scanners. I've got DNA analysis, whatever the heck it is. And anyone who was here last year and saw my previous presentation knows that I love this lovely picture of a PDP-7. This is the Apple's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, and this is the very first computer out there that runs Unix as we know it today. And remember, macOS is underlying Unix. At the end of the day, it is a Unix-based system. It is based on the wonders of 1960s technology at its highest. It is a username and password in order to get into your shared resources. And why did they have to put a username and password on there? Because somebody at the university was cheating and decided they were going to use the system and space of somebody else, so they had to throw a password on it. And if we look at the Apple Platform Security Guide, you can actually see why this is baked into the very essence and DNA of all Apple devices, whether it's a Mac, an iPhone, an iPad, new Vision Pro devices, etc. Passcodes and passwords are essential to the security of an Apple device, every single Apple device. So if you unlock your iPhone, the very first thing that it's going to do is ask you for a password if you have never turned it on before, or if you suddenly are wearing a mask because there's been a large pandemic and we're all crazy and need to have to stay inside, but we didn't ignore that information, so we went outside with masks on. For the Apple devices specifically, when you're unlocking the device for the very first time, the factors that you can use to access your Mac are going to be a password of some form, a PIN number possibly on an iOS device, or you can use a physical hardware card of a smart card PIV. So the idea there is that these are the only ways that you can get in. Why is the biometric turned off? Well, we'll talk about that in a little tiny bit. Now, with all of these factors out there, for some strange reason, the world has this obsession of being angry at a jam band from the 90s. And I don't quite understand why, because it's not really Fish, the band, that's what we're talking about here today. Anyone who doesn't know the derivation, by the way, why we call it fishing, it's based off of freaking. You know, good old Con C. Smith back there in the day, picking up the phone and freaking the phone company out by taking their Captain Crunch whistle, whistling into it and making in all the free long-distance calls that you could want. If you didn't go to the session, by the way, on the history of how computers peaked in 1984, learn your history, folks. This is the great stuff behind us. The shoulders of giants that we sit on there are all based off the fact they wanted to make some free phone calls. Makes me happy. So if we're looking at phishable methods and non-phishable methods, generally the idea is that if you have something that you can grab from somebody, like by tricking them into telling them, hey, this is something I need you to go and do, that's a phishable method. So something that you know, I can look up your mother's maiden name. I can look up when you were born. I can look up, I could shoulder surf you and get your PIN number off for your phone here or your credit card to get into your bank. A possession-based factor is a little bit more difficult. The idea is that there's an extra bit of stuff that you have to do, and whether you believe the movie Sneakers or whatnot, you know, grabbing someone's card off the desk is a little bit less likely to happen when that card also happens to be, you know, the phone that I basically look at 24/7 of my life. And then something that you are, that biometric, it's really hard to remove that unless you're very talented, according to Hollywood. But generally, those don't work very well for a very long period of time afterwards, so you probably don't want to try to go down that method of stealing that piece there. Then, the wonderful world of the additive nature of fish. There is a concept here that if you combine two methods together, if you had multiple factors combined together, that at that point, you'd be able to have a non-phishable item. So if I have a possession-based factor combined with a knowledge-based factor, that's a non-phishable factor. Great. Now, when you look at that piece there, you have to remember that, but what if I did something that there was no knowledge-based factor out there, if it was going to be completely passwordless? Well, remember that passwordless isn't really truly passwordless. You are actually creating something else based on having something. So whether it's a biometric, it's based on the complexity of the fingerprints, actually it's the blood vessels underneath of my fingerprints that they're detecting inside the Apple devices here. But it still derives some sort of hash value that gets compared to something else. It could be encrypted with the secure element and tied to the hardware, encryption certificates and tokens that are built into that, but still at the end of the day, it is just a hash. Somebody can always break the method that was used to derive how that biometric was used to make a password, essentially. So end of the day, it's always still just one of those two things, possession or a password or something derived thereof. Now, the Macs and the iPhones have this beautiful biometric thing built into them, right? They have this glorious Face ID system. It's really great, works really well. Put on a mask, it even figures that out. It can even unlock based off possession-based factors sometimes if I have my phone or my watch attached to me. I got Touch ID. They're great, so why is it not available to us at the login screen? Well, it's available to us at some points during the session. So it's used when we're unlocking from a screensaver. It's used after I've turned on my phone for the first time and typed in the PIN number. Why is it not available when I'm actually unlocking or turning on the device for the very first time? Well, you can blame Apple for this, and they actually tell you why, right there again in the platform security guide. So what happens is with that hash that they're basically deriving from your physical being, they are taking and putting that into the secure enclave, and then they are locking it into the user keychain. So you need to unlock your keychain first before you can get access to the biometric and use that biometric. Again, that's how they're deciding they're going to get to the biometric-based factor on your device, by making it so you have to have a knowledge-based factor to access the device. Now, besides the additive nature of fish, There is also the multiplicative nature of the password reset procedure, which will essentially make it so everything bad that you could possibly do to your password and your factor could just be negated by the fact that you have a help desk employee that's being a fool. I would like to specifically call out the very last line in this multiplying matrix here that you have that is, yes, if anybody recognizes this, which I heard the giggles from the audience here, no, that is literally a line from a movie about hacking somebody and getting into a secure resource. Mr. Robert Redford was famous for being able to get in and find out what C-Tech astronomy really meant. There is a certain very large bank whose name shall go unmentioned, but rhymes with Mel's Gargo, that I called them the other day to get access into my account, and it literally had me read out that passphrase in order to get into my account to verify my identity. And I just want to call out publicly saying, the hell. So no matter what you have for a good solid basis of accessing either your cloud-based resource, your physical resources out there, it can always be negated by dumb things happening on the help desk. And I have to say a true story. Besides my lovely bank there, I was actually in my truck out in Santa Clara meeting with someone who is a friend of mine who happened to work for a very large casino. And this was 2 weeks after a certain incident had happened in Las Vegas, and he got a message on his phone and freaked out immediately because it was an Okta notification saying, we have just reset all of your factors. Please go and set up new ones. With no notification. His help desk got a ticket and just reset all of his factors. He has access to everything and immediately freaked out over this because they literally just had an incident that shut down casinos for weeks. And as it turned out, it was luckily just his test instance, but the person who reset that password, reset those factors without verifying that he was actually him first, immediately got fired. So don't do that. You teach your help desk staff that the multiplicative nature of phish also negates the additive nature of phish. So don't make phishing resistant resources and factors phishing attempts. It's bad. So now that we've figured out the max factor part, why the heck are we talking about that when it comes to max? Well, what the heck is single sign-on extension? Is that thing where I have to type my password in 27 times a day? No. What the Apple extensible single sign-on extension does is it makes your Mac into a factor. It is a possession-based factor that you now have access to, or your iPhone into a factor, or your Vision Pro, until they actually, they need to get some authenticators on there, but that's another story. We were very much excited about Vision Pro being used in the workplace, aren't we all? You want to see those fake eyeballs just staring at you all day long. It's great. Now, the security of this possession-based factor is increased by adding an additional factor, which, because we know Apple has decided that all of their security on all their devices is based on a password, therefore, you have to have a knowledge-based factor in order to get into and use your possession-based factor. And that is going to be a password of some form when you first start up the computer. How many people have rebooted their computer during this entire conference? Okay, a few more than I expected here. Most users, and the average time that one of my coworkers found when he was working at a major college in handling the entire fleet, including all the lab computers that rebooted themselves every night, found the average time between reboots was about 38 days. So, 38 days ago, someone was standing at that device and typed in a knowledge-based factor that allowed that device to work. Now, a spoiler for what we're going to be talking about a little bit later here, and where we get into the risks part, is nothing about the actual extensible single sign-on payload or how to use it there requires any sort of biometric, or for that matter actually requires a knowledge-based factor for using it after that initial time that you type in your password. We'll get into that in a little bit in a second. Like I said, write manuals so other people can ignore them. Unfortunately, when you write stuff down, people just ignore and start getting in and skipping words when you're talking about stuff. So I want to make sure that we have some really good clarity of what the difference in all of these words are. First, you have single sign-on, the Kerberos single sign-on. This is the replacement for Enterprise Connect. It's been dead and gone for a while. This basically lets you take your Macintosh and go out and get a Kerberos ticket or a certificate. For those who didn't know it's a certificate from an AD server and puts it onto your computer. And then that certificate is now a factor in order to access some resource gated with that Kerberos ticket. Awesome. Old school. Love it. Extensible single sign-on. SSOE, the single sign-on extension in its truest form. That is a way to do the exact same thing, but it is for accessing a cloud-based resource of some form. So they are two separate things, and they are different than platform single sign-on and other single sign-ons, which also have the same acronyms, which is even more fun. Now, on top of that, SSOE comes in two flavors. There is a credential type flavor where it redirects and says anytime that you go out to go use or get a credential to access a cloud-based resource, that's the Authentication Services API on the Mac that you're going to be accessing. Don't go out to the actual cloud-based resource itself. I want you to grab the credential with an app on the device. Or alternatively, there is a URL interception method called redirect. And this is where macOS and iOS actually creates a local proxy on the device on the network layer. And what happens is anytime that somebody's going out to hit one of the authentication endpoints, a literal URL, anytime someone's hitting that, that's where I want to reroute that data to some sort of application on the device. We'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But on top of that, there are more SSOEs. There is enrollment SSO, which is also ESSOE, OEOEOE. So that's where it gets confusing. And then there's platform single sign-on, which is an extension of extensible single sign-on, PSSOE. So now we're getting even really long acronyms here. And PSSOE applies literally only to the Macs. It does not work on iPhones. So the next time I see a help desk ticket from somebody coming in saying they want to implement PSSO on their iPhones, I'm going to scream. Please use words more gooder. These are the different things out there. So extensible single sign-on, platform single sign-on, and enrollment single sign-on, they all work the same way. They all go out and do this thing, which is when you go and access a resource, a cloud-based resource, the network layer essentially intercepts that authentication request and says, I'm going to replace the answer that you would normally get from a web page or an authentication endpoint, and I'm going to have it done locally on the device with some application that is essentially caching and negotiating credentials for you on your behalf. So what will happen is you have an application, a companion application from your identity provider that's been signed with certain entitlements granted by Apple. Your something, could be web page, could be an application, it could be a native app on the device there, goes out and wants a authentication type. That could be a SAML request, OAuth request, OpenID connects, OI812, any of those methods, and that will get renegotiated by the application on the device. I thought I'd get more of a giggle off of OU812. You don't know the seminal album of like 1980s hard rock here? Come on, let's go. Now, some of the applications are actually capable, some of the identity providers actually will intercept other application type requests too. So for example, Microsoft has its own authentication library built onto the device, so it'll intercept what they call MSAL, or Microsoft Authentication Library requests. The application is responsible to first go out one time and authenticate who you are through some sort of method. Now, most of the time that's going to be, they're going to ask you to log into the cloud-based system with one or more factors that they have established with you. So that could be a knowledge-based factor saying, okay, I want you to sign into Okta. It could be combined with, I also need to send you a push notification to make sure you're actually you. Or it could be throw in your token, or throw in your FIDO card, or toss your PIV at the reader, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this was introduced a long time ago. This was actually introduced in macOS Catalina 10.15, where for the longest period of time, about 5 years ago, it went about as unnoticed as a fart in a hot tub. And then about 2 years ago, identity providers started picking up what this would actually mean for their end users. And so they actually started putting out supported releases for it. So on Okta, it's called FastPass, and Microsoft Authenticator and the company Portal app is used for iOS and macOS to be able to enable this. Those are the only two identity providers that are actually currently supporting any of this. So if you are on Ping Federate, Shibboleth, or anything like that, stick around for the cake at the end of the session, but none of this applies to you. Sorry. Why? It's actually dependent on the protocol that the application ID with that special entitlement has been announced by the identity provider as being something valid to be an authentication method to get into their system. So hidden away on your identity provider in a URL in a cabinet behind, at the end of a set of unused stairs behind a door that says "Beware the leopard" is a well-known endpoint that says this application ID is acceptable to make authentication requests on behalf of my identity provider. And that application ID is dependent on the IDP to be able to say this app is signed and it's okay for it, which means the IDP is responsible for writing the application. If you happen to have your own identity provider, if you have somehow written your own piece, I'm going to look at someone called, let's see, what's his name? Joel Rennick. Yes, he presented and wrote his entire own identity provider and wrote the platform single sign-on application to combine to go along with it there. If you're that crazy, nuts, and smart, Tim Prefect of Two Canoes actually has released an open source version of that PSSOE plugin, and you could write a PSSOE app for your own identity provider if you wanted to. Your mileage may vary. It's not very easy. Go watch, Joel will be doing a session tomorrow. I'd highly recommend joining in on that if you want to get that level of deep details. But trust me, the folks at Microsoft and the folks at Okta have been beating on this for a long time, and it took a while to get it to work. It also took a lot of feedback to Apple in order to make sure that it actually worked the way they wanted. So, single sign-on, it's a possession factor. It can only be activated on a managed device. You have to activate it through an MDM installed profile. It cannot be just activated locally on the device by doing defaults right. Once that is active, it's active. It's on that device. You sign in once, you're going to sign as that user for everything from now on to the end of the universe. It even works in private browsing mode in Safari. So anything that goes through the network layer gets redirected to the SSOE, which can be good and bad in some ways. So some identity providers, Microsoft, will allow you to have multiple accounts working with the single sign-on extension on a Mac. So if you have developers out there that might have test accounts, great. When it comes up asking for an authentication request, it'll say, which of the accounts would you like to use? Some identity providers, Okta, because obviously there's only one other identity provider I'm talking about today, Sean. But you even bother to say some? Anyway, they'll figure it out later. Okta makes it so once you sign into that ID, that token and get that application once, it's it. You cannot sign as anything else. The only thing that you can do if you needed to sign as a different type of account on that Mac is to use something that doesn't use the native macOS network layer. And for right now, that is Firefox and Google Chrome. They do not use their own network layer. There might be a point in the near future where Google Chrome will work with a single sign-on extension on the Macs. Might. Talk to Google. I know nothing. Absolutely did not have a discussion about how configuration profiles are accessible by any application on the device, and what do you know, the payload happens to have all the URLs that you want to access. Didn't tell them that at all. No, absolutely not. So there's one of two types of payloads that you'll create in order to get extensible single sign-on in its basic form to work. And that's either going to be a credential-based payload. That's what it looks like for Okta here. So Okta, you just have the host that you would use for getting your credentials, your Okta tenant ID. And you say credentials, and here's the identifier bundle and the name of the app. It just pushes on down, pretty simple and easy. There's a couple other options at the bottom here, by the way, that I didn't show. And then for Microsoft, it's very simple, very similar, but they have more authentication URLs in their instructions out there. So there's an authentication endpoint specifically for China, for example. So because you're behind the Great Firewall of China, you might not be able to hit the US endpoint. Or FedRAMP has its own special endpoint for authentication. And because we don't talk about betas, we're going to use good old Mac OS Sonoma here in order to see what it looks like when you very first time you use a single sign-on extension. So we've already established that we have a user account on this device. We're in a user session, we're in Finder, we're going to pop open Safari for the very first time and access some resource. So here, we're going to go just to the myaccountmicrosoft.com site, and Tommy the Ice Machine Jones, savior of the 1938 ball game between Penn State University and What's the Matter You, is signing in for the very first time on his brand new Mac. And Tommy, who is now logged in, we see, yep, there he is, manager of refrigeration and materials at the Creamery. Why is that the joke, by the way? Come see me afterwards and I'll tell you what the inside joke is on that one. But it happened last year and it really drives Alan Goldbig crazy and makes me happy. Anyway, so now that we've primed it, now if we go into any other application that's going to require some sort of authentication, I'll pop open a private browsing window here for, again, going to the same website. Private browsing shouldn't be using any session cookies from the previous time. I hit the authentication, it goes out, hits the SSOE, brand new session, Tommy's logged in again. Rock on. If I go to any other resource that uses a credential from Microsoft, I'm going to go log into a Jamf Cloud server here, Jamf Pro server. Just for an example, I happen to have that as an easy one that used a SAML extension, so SAML login. So there's Tommy. Tommy's logged in. Awesome. It also works for any other application out there that might be native and using the native network stack too. So if I crack open another application to start up a VPN and the VPN happens to need to be gated with a sign-in, it'll go out. Here's where that window comes up saying if I want to pick multiple user accounts. So I'm going to say, okay, Tommy gets to log in again. There's a little plus button on the bottom there so I could actually add additional count if I wanted to. And it silently uses the authentication factor to get in. Rock on. That's pretty convenient for people. We have a question down in the front here before anything else. Go for it.
That last window that just popped up where you could select identities, was that from Microsoft or Jamf?
The last window that popped up where you can select identities, was that Microsoft or was that Jamf is the question? The answer is that is Microsoft. That is actually the company portal application that negotiates the authentication requests. The only place that the MDM comes into play here at all is pushing down the config profile to the device. So nothing that you saw there. I was accessing some Jamf servers, but that's because I'm lazy and I happen to have them available to me all the time. But that's what we were seeing as we're seeing the application from the identity provider. Now to show the flip side of that and also show the enrollment SSO at the same time, I pulled out Okta because I want to be fully even in my opinions here. So this is actually showing enrollment single sign-on. And enrollment single sign-on is single sign-on intended kind of for any device that's going to be using account-driven user enrollment to get the device into your MDM. You saw that I copied my username because I'm going to have to type my username a whole bunch of times to get in and enrolled this method. Magically, we are going to push down a copy of Okta Verify onto the device. It does not require the user be logged into iCloud. It does not require an App Store account. It does not require a VPP purchase of that app. It just magically pushes it down as part of the enrollments. How Apple decided they were going to do that, fun times. So, after we've logged in, we're now gating the user to access we're now gating the user to try to get into the actual MDM server. This is just basically like a SAML login. I paused here because this is what shows up for Okta when you're doing the role here. And I want to put one other note too. When we magically push down an application from the App Store without any user interaction, through fairy farts and dragon tears and whatever the heck Apple decided to do there, that was fun. If the app already exists on the device, it will fail with bad messaging to the end user with very confusing words. So if, for example, you're rolling out a BYO program where I might already have an authenticator method on the device, like, hey, I got Okta Verify on here, now I'm enrolling and I'm pushing down this application, it will fail the enrollment, which is fun. So what am I supposed to do here? Which buttons should I press? Should I press the large friendly button that says Okta FastPass, or should I type in my username and password because I've never actually used the single sign-on extension before? What do we think? So we're going to pit FastPass, right? Okay, that's what the room thinks. So let's see what happens here when we really do this. So I chose poorly. I typed in my username. I'm now typing in my password. Okay. This should prime the single sign-on extension, right? First time I've ever logged in. Now I'm going to have to go log into iCloud for work, sign on in the same exact account, Apple ID for your organization. Hey, the single sign-on extension didn't work. Why not? No, I'm not enrolled in the MDM yet. It's literally, I haven't even pushed down the profile to the device to say activate the MDM here. But what we're expected to do with this enrollment single sign-on method is it's intended to go out and actually say use the companion application to somehow prime itself, and you're supposed to know this. So I actually backed up. When I hit the FastPass button, now it'll go through its own, it actually loads the application on iOS. It goes through and sets up negotiates a token for the very first time. I'm prompted to log in yet again. And here's my username, here's my password. Now I'm getting that refresh token that I'm sticking into the companion application. Now at this point, SSOE still isn't actually activated yet. It's actually just using that third-party application for the authentication. So this is way easier than just typing in your username and password, right, guys? Yeah, really easy. Then once it does that notification and sets itself up and registers the device, yes, turn on Face ID, blah, blah, blah. Now the account is added to the Authenticator app. Now it bounces me back to the Settings application, where now I can verify. Go back to Settings, good. That's fun, huh? Now that we've done that, now it'll log me in. Do I trust this? Yes, I do. This is the old way of actually getting managed Apple IDs to work with Okta, so I apologize for that. I haven't decided to redo all of my stuff. Now it finally pushes down all the configuration profiles, including a configuration profile that says use that application that got pushed down as the single sign-on extension app, companion app on this device. So now that I've done that, now from this point forward, I'll start installing some applications. If I go into any app that uses the native interface for macOS for the network layer, or if I go into Safari, I should automatically be logged in. There's my MDM profile. There's where it's saying here's Okta Verify as the single sign-on extension active. This works even if you just push down the regular single sign-on extension, not through this crazy method. And now if I go into an app, here we go, the Okta Verify shows that it's been registered. I'll go hit a website that has, I'll type in the right URL for the website that I need to access first, and now it verifies my identity. It's asking for a passcode here. Well, that's jumping ahead a little bit. I'll show you how that worked in a second. And now I'm in my resource. Great. That was an awful lot to just get enrolled. It has not changed since it came out last year, but I think last time we were at Penn State and I presented this, that hadn't actually officially been released. It's now available to the public in case you want to torture all of your fellow coworkers with that type of enrollment method. I don't think it really improves anything. The idea was originally that you were going to put down some application that would help you not necessarily single sign in to your cloud service. It was intended to help you enroll the device into the MDM. It hasn't really worked out that way. Feedback is necessary. So, again, spoilers. We were talking about how single sign-on extension has nothing in that payload at all that requires you to add any additional payloads in for security on the device. So even though you now have a possession-based factor, there's nothing forcing you from throwing a biometric or a knowledge-based factor beyond the I'm turning on the device for the very first time. And of course, What is the fallback for biometrics? Say if you're wearing a mask or it can't figure out your identity because you got a new set of glasses, falls back to knowledge-based factor again. So fun times. In order to get into that factor, it essentially turns your iOS device, your Mac, it's into a factor like a YubiKey, with one major exception. This is a slide stolen gratuitously from the FIDO Alliance. I'd like to thank them for letting me use this under fair use. This is talking about how an actual FIDO key of some form works. So this would be for something like a YubiKey, or it would also be for the new name for a FIDO2 authentication token, which would be passkeys. So the passkey is a possession-based factor of some form. It's tied to hardware in many cases, or it can be synchronized to a third-party service, say like iCloud Keychain, 1Password, a Microsoft Authenticator, et cetera, et cetera. It uses a combination of a challenge sign response talking to a public key and a private key in order to determine if you're actually who you are. But the most important part here in this, to me, is that it requires that a user gesture be done to the device before it actually hands out and does an authentication to start that session. Why is that important? Well, if you walked up to the Jamf booth anytime this weekend and you went to go sign up for a lovely giveaway there for that 3D printed model that my coworker created for us all, you probably used this specific iPad, which I recorded earlier here. Did you know that you were signed in as Tommy the Ice Machine Jones the entire time? This iPad has absolutely no username and password requirement to get into it. There is no biometric signed up. There is no passcode. And yet, this device can get in private browsing mode as the person, good old Tommy Ice Machine Jones. So, why did we just do that? To prove a point, hopefully, and to make sure that you're actually reading the screen. But anyway, there's nothing about single sign-on that has any mandatory requirement for user verification. And to me, that tells me that we need to add some additional security when we're going to be using SSOE. But let's make it worse. Let's talk about platform single sign-on. All right. Platform single sign-on is everything that you've seen up to this point on a Mac specifically, not on an iOS device. Remember, use words more gooder. It is specifically for the Mac deployment. And I apologize if I didn't ask you in advance for this, but I cribbed this from your slide deck. I apologize. Thanks, Microsoft. We love you too. Platform single sign-on comes in 3 flavors of ways that you can set it up. There is the password sync method. There is the smart card bound method, and then there's the secure enclave key. Now, one of these is still a knowledge-based factor. So the password sync does literally what's written on the box. When you sign into your Mac at the macOS login window, or you sign in to something that requires an authentication, like the PAM in order to unlock your Mac, we go out and check that credential that you typed in against the identity provider. Smart card ties to smart cards. If you're one of the few people in the world that's stuck using PIVs, I apologize profusely. I'm not going to talk about that today. But it's the same idea. You have a possession factor. You can still use that smart card to unlock File Vault in the current macOS Sonoma if you have an Apple Silicon-based processor to unlock File Vault. Really nice. That makes it into a true possession factor to get into your Mac, and you can require a PIN in order to access that smart card. Last is a secure enclave key. So what this does is it actually creates a way to authenticate to the identity provider using your cloud credentials. It is very much not a replacement for passwords on your Mac. Any person who thinks that it is a passwordless way to get into your Mac, oh, we can now use the identity provider, which is all passwordless to access my Mac. No. There is still a password to get into your Mac. There is still a password for File Vault. There is very much a password to get into that device. It is not passwordless. Sorry, Charlie. Anyone who's telling you otherwise is lying, or I'm completely wrong. Anyway, we're talking going back to our favorite jam band of the 90s here and talk about phishable methods. Now, The first one, obviously, password sync there. When I'm syncing up my local account password to my cloud identity provider password, it's still a phishable method. I can try to trick you into giving my password. Now I have access to your cloud resources. Now I have access to your actual physical device. The secure enclave key is a non-phishable method for accessing your cloud resources. It is still a possession-based factor. That being said, the majority of Mac admins that I've spoken to are mainly concerned about the security of the actual physical device and what happens here. This is a major concern. People shoulder surf and grab passcodes for iPhones. There's a reason why Apple has such a huge problem with this that they introduced advanced data protection on iOS devices. If someone was to shoulder surf and then steal your phone, they would have to be literally at your house in order to make any changes to iCloud to turn off, say, iCloud keychain on your device or to hack into any of your other resources available. Possession-based factors are combined with a knowledge-based factor in order to get into it is great until you remember the 37 days that it took for me to be able to reboot my entire fleet of computers. So unless I've actually pushed down some requirement to be able to access the device with more than just a knowledge-based factor, there's going to be an issue, at least in my thoughts. Now, remember how we talked about there being multiple payloads too for the extensible single sign-on? There's redirect and credentials. Well, both the identity providers that support this do this in different ways. So if you're using platform single sign-on and you're using Microsoft, that takes over everything. Platform turns on. Now you can sign into all of your cloud-based resources automatically. One payload, one application, real simple to do. If you are doing Okta Identity Engine, there are additional steps, and it is not very clear on the Okta documentation on what you have to do. You actually have to put 2 payloads to make the full thing work. You could theoretically turn on password sync for Okta and just use the redirect payload, and it will just update the password of the local device. It will not actually gate you into an Okta resource at that point. So you have to actually put both credential and redirect payloads in there, so it uses FastPass and what they call Okta Desktop Password Sync. Now, I was hoping by this point that we'd see a public version of macOS, so we're all going to just go, shh, we're not talking about this in public. Let's talk about the beta. So one of the big things in the platform single sign-on, what's new for IT administrators, was this beautiful page here that says that with platform single sign-on in macOS Sequoia or macOS Cicada or macOS Sonoma, whatever you want to call it this week, you can require IDP authentication at the file vault screen. You can also require the lock screen. Brand new, interesting ways to lock your users out of their computers to make sure that they don't work. After some clarification with the developers at WWDC, we saw that there was an example payload given in this lovely screen here saying that you can do things like enforce single sign-on at the login window in the file vault policy. But there's one problem, and that is this is showing the current version. This is actually beta 2. I didn't go out and destroy our poor hotel's resources downloading the beta here tonight. But if you go to the macOS login screen, you see, or you wake from PAM, you've got an ability to grab a network. If you're at the macOS login screen, you can pick a network. If you're at the file vault screen, there is no picking of network. So if you go and do something crazy like saying instead of attempt authentication at file vault, you say enforce or require authentication at file vault, you have a very good chance of just locking that user out of that computer completely. There are 2 known network types that will work at the file vault login screen since you don't have a picker. One is an open network, completely open Wi-Fi, or completely open Ethernet network. 2 is a WPA personal, password-only authentication, and it has to be a network that you've attached to at some point in the past. Every other method means you have to get something out of the user keychain, or it's something that's encrypted in the secure element of the device, which you still can't get to because you haven't authenticated and they haven't unlocked that part. So if you have any 802.1x, all you EduRoam customers out there, and if you try to put in, if you think that this is going to solve your problem at the file vault screen, it's not, unfortunately. We were told the other solution was just simply plug in an Ethernet adapter and just go ahead and plug right into your laptop, because we all carry those around. We all have network cable drops available everywhere, don't we? Then you're going to run into the problem of the USB restriction. So if you've never plugged in that USB driver to that computer in that specific port, you cannot connect to the network because you have to accept it as a user during a user session before it'll allow it to use that accessory. So this isn't the be-all, end-all, but the idea would be that it'll bring you back to that wonderful date when we were all binding our Macs to AD. And you could change your password on the AD server, and it would update the password on your Mac automatically. I did promise in our notes there would be a slide that says, "Don't panic," in large friendly letters, so I did offer that here. Learn more about this in the next session with Michael and Mark. They will be talking more about the wonderful world of platform single sign-on as deployed by Microsoft. So, now that we have a factor that has no requirements for any sort of accessing the device, let's start to harden it down. And if you were out in the parking lot, you saw my big honkin' Airstream trailer that we traveled across the country. I actually came from Nevada and drove out here to Mac Admins because I'm crazy. But there's one thing that we've learned in the many, many, many miles when stopping. We need to do three things when we drop that trailer, and that's block it, lock it, and shock it. And just to that same note, there's going to be three different things you want to do to your devices in order to secure them if you're going to be making the factor. We need to protect the factor. So the first thing is if we have the ability to shoulder surf devices and we have the ability to have smart cards and PIVs, that's great. The first thing you need to do absolutely under no circumstances otherwise is just turn on File Vault. Turn it on. Why are there some organizations that refuse to do this? That's at least one knowledge-based factor that you have to have on that 37th day when someone plugs something in. The other thing that you can do is use some sort of login window addendum or replacement out there. And for example, a certain product that Jamf makes, I apologize, called Jamf Connect can add in additional things like cloud identity provider requirement of MFA. Xcreds is also another application out there that does something similar. Or you can use some sort of application that adds into the login window mechanism the need for an offline multi-factor authentication. Now, this is still a phishable factor because someone could theoretically steal and then ask for if someone's calling you asking for the code on your phone that after they stole your computer, you probably have bigger problems. But Jamf Connect offers the ability to have an offline multi-factor authentication, even if you are offline. Also, Okta Desktop MFA is a new product that Okta will be more than happy to charge you more money for, that actually puts another login window mechanism into there. After File Vault, it'll stop you. It actually authenticates the user, unlocks their keychain, and then is able to read the secrets out of it, so it can actually tie to some sort of hardware authenticator at that point and read if you need a non-phishable method to get in. Microsoft does not have any login window products available for the Mac, but spoiler for their session, one of the things that happens when you activate platform single sign-on is they ask you to also activate the ability to use Microsoft Authenticator or the Microsoft Company Portal app as a passkey provider. So this is something that you should turn on. It can't be done programmatically, but it does bring back that option to require a user gesture before you authenticate and use that resource or start that session if you do some fun things in the cloud security part of your hardening piece. So this is where you as Mac admins are probably going to have to talk to your coworkers. I know that's always a fun time, sometimes some organizations, but you need to talk to the cloud team in this case. In Microsoft Entra, you can actually add additional authentication methods to harden any cloud login here. And one of the things you can turn on is additional things like requiring a FIDO2 key, which activates a passkey. Microsoft Authenticator can be used as a push notification, OAuth token, cert-based, whatever it is. Passkey is the spoiler. Anyway, Entra conditional access, you then have to create a conditional access policy to access your cloud whatever that is set to require multiple factors. So what will happen here is when you log into that resource, it will use single sign-on extension as one factor. If you have it set up as platform single sign-on with the secure element key, you'll consider that a non-phishable factor. And then the rules that you would use in order to access that resource would be, I want to grant access if you have multiple factors. And because you turned on passkey support, and what is passkey? Passkey is a FIDO2 token, and what does FIDO2 require? User authentication. Anytime that you go to access that web page, that cloud resource, etc., you'll be asked for another factor, which in this case could be Touch ID. So now you've got a biometric, and you essentially have two non-phishable authenticators at the same time, which protects, even though the device itself is still vulnerable to shoulder surfing and theft attacks, at least the cloud resource that you're accessing is protected. Now just keep in mind that there are some gotchas on this. When you create conditional access policies that apply to all cloud apps, you might be affecting some resources out there that you weren't expecting. Go see Mark and Michael and my session last year at JNUC, which is available on YouTube, for more details about how all cloud apps work for conditional access policies. And the other thing that people get a lot of pushback on is that you need some sort of extra device to do multiple factor authentication. So if you're working for a large airline, anything with a union, any place like educators, people are resistant to putting an authenticator on their own personal device if it's used for work and not getting paid for it. So you might be buying some additional hardware for people. And of course, again, SSOE in secure enclave mode is non-phishable. From Okta Identity Engine, it's a little bit different. In this particular case, remember, you need to be on Okta Identity Engine, not Okta Classic, for this to work at all. You must be on Identity Engine. Classic does not have the ability to use PSSO or SSOE. You go into your global session policy and you say, first off, the strange thing of saying, I actually want to establish a user session without MFA. There's a global setting that's like knocks it for everybody. You actually want to turn that to not required, which is a little odd because you're actually going to apply the policy on an individual authentication policy rule. So I can have different rules for accessing the Okta desktop versus accessing Salesforce, for example. So in here, you would create an authentication policy that says either I want that to be available with one factor minus password. New feature of Okta, you can actually go and say don't use this specific factor. You could say any two factors. You could say password, another factor. And one of the nice things here is that Okta just has a button that says I want to require user interaction. So when you check that box, it's going to require that one of your methods of interaction has to have either a PIN on your FIDO2 token, it's going to have Touch ID enabled, Face ID, something real sweet, simple to set up, and it's whack the button, win the cookie. And that's what it looks like in Identity Engine. It's going to say one factor type except for password, two factors that requires interaction, or a password with another factor also require interaction. The last thing of the three, block it, lock it. Network security. With single sign-on extension in any of its forms out there, you have basically turned your Mac or your iOS device, your Apple device, into a token-generating machine. It will continue going out and making new tokens for new services over and over and over again unless the identity provider is warned that something bad has happened or a security event has happened on theirs. So if a device becomes compromised for some reason, it gets a token that says access the resource right now, and it gets a little mini token, a little tiny baby token there that says here's a refresh token to go get more tokens. And so it'll just keep getting more tokens. Now you've got a compromised device that's potentially going out and just minting new machines. So if I go to a website here that goes and uses the most cursed font ever on the face of the planet, good old Papyrus, we obviously know it's been pwned. We go out, we access the network layer. That website is somehow requesting an authentic token. It's now going to get a token, and it just keeps making it. And now the device is somehow compromised. So what options we have right now is we're currently just going out to our normal DNS layer and saying, hey, network layer, just give me this website, load it up. Good old Tiny P. Shout out to my DN simpletons. Love you guys dearly. Amy, I miss you. This is Tiny P. This is the resolver here. So they're out there saying, yay, here's your DNS request. What if we replace that And this could be done with multitude of different tools. But what if we replaced our network layer to be able to say, I want to manage the DNS and I want to route the traffic securely through a different edge. If I do this, then I can say if you're going to hit a known endpoint that's compromised, number one, I could just block it. I can say, no, I know that that endpoint's compromised. And number two, we have the ability, since it's on the edge, to say this specific device, which is managed and talking to my MDM server, and I'm the one that's controlling the network layer too, I just know that that event just happened on this device. Maybe something else, like a user just hit a phishing website, then they're trying to be compromised. Let's send that risk announcement to the identity provider so it can say, don't hand out more tokens. This is what the combination of the shared signals framework sender combined with the continuous access evaluation protocol receiver does. So when a user hits a compromised website, the SSF sender says, hey, identity provider, bad things just happened. Do what you want to do with this knowledge. In this case, Okta is set up to be able to do this right now, and they can actually receive signals from a whole bunch of different places. Jamf Connect is one, CrowdStrike's another. There's a whole bunch of different vendors out there that actually send these signals to say that person's been compromised. So that way, the single sign-on extension will stop being able to access and get new tokens for things. So just to summarize, and then I threatened you all with this earlier, there will be cake at the end of this session. Hope you came for the cake. Single sign-on is a possession factor, a single factor. If you are setting up your policies to say that this is the only factor I need to get in, keep in mind you are now setting up a weaker security stance. PSSOE is also a possession factor. It does also have things outside there that may weaken your access to the local device itself. And if you're accessing the resource and the resource is factor, you have to protect the device. Side personal note, I have tested out platform single sign-on in secure enclave mode that does not touch the local account password at all, along with Jamf Connect, which manages the local password. And those two working together work really well. So you could have your possession-based authentication managed by the PSSOE and have a nice non-phishable method, and then you could have Jamf Connect as the login screen, gating people with multiple factors to get into the actual physical device. Probably works the same way with Xcreds. I haven't tested that yet, but you got the idea. Now, before I give you cake, and there will be cake, there's a large cake. They made me buy my own plates. Can you believe this? They wouldn't let me use those. I'd ask a favor that you can give a gift of feedback to Apple about one specific thing, and that is good old File Vault. The biggest thing about platform single sign-on, the biggest problem that I have with the entire idea of having a single-based factor just be the possession factor that I'm actually accessing that on the same resource, is the fact that File Vault uses a single basic authentication method to encrypt our data at rest. It's 2024. We shouldn't be using basic auths for anything, especially encrypting stuff that might actually have a lot of personally identifiable information, whether it's going to be student data, healthcare information. Someone's credit card is going to end up on that machine at some point. I am asking our organizations to log into Apple School Manager, or log into Feedback Assistant with your Apple School Manager managed Apple account, so that way it ties it to your organization. Switch over to organization mode and file feedback to Apple if this is a problem at your organization, that basic authentication is no longer acceptable to decrypt our stored data at rest. This is entirely on Apple to update this, and I think it is the biggest threat to our devices right now. They've activated the security to be able to make restrict changes on our iOS devices. I'd love to see this on macOS, or at least something to solve this problem. The slides for this session are both going to be available on the Mac admins, and I'll be at the Jamf booth after this, and I also have them up on my GitHub as well. And to that end, thank you, Penn State, for having me. Thank you, Mac admins, for putting up with me. We do have 15 minutes available to us for question and answer time, and I'm sure you got something. And whoever would like to have a box flung at them, please do let me know. Here we go.
I'm just curious, do you think with all these platform SSO, Jamf Connect will go away?
It's a great question. Right now, I have a feeling there's going to be an awful lot of organizations that want to bring back that that early 2000s bind my Mac to AD. How simple was it for me to reset a user's password? And they're probably going to want to use platform single sign-on in that password sync mode. That's the one thing that Jamf Connect can't do. I can't magically change someone's password on a device because it's a password nag utility rather than a password enforcement utility. So I think that'll probably be the first place where people will look at and say, okay, this is simpler in my solution. But the flip side of that is that now I have a method where I could potentially be a malicious admin and change someone's password on their computer and get into it, and that might be bad, but I have a feeling we live in a world right this very second where there are people using the Kerberos single sign-on extension, that are using platform single sign-on or trying to start use it. People are using Jamf Connect, people are using Xcreds, people are still using the now pour one out for Nomad, deprecated Nomad. It's different tools for different needs. And I have a feeling that I'm going to be explaining how they all work for a very long period of time. The other flip side of that is that any of the single sign-on extensions depend on identity provider support. And there's only 2 IDPs that are up there, and I don't know about you, but there's an awful lot of y'all that use something different than just Okta and Azure out there. So for those folks, there will probably be some solution in place other than platform single sign-on for a while. That might be Jamf Connect. And we got a question over here. Fling.
Do you think that single sign-on is feasible for student lab environments?
Do I think that single sign-on is feasible for student lab environments? One of the things that we did not bring up during the session is that platform single sign-on is not a zero-touch enrollment experience. So there is no way at this time to enable it without user interaction for the very first time. So if I want to put it into a lab-based mode, an administrator account needs to be created onto the Mac at some place, and that user then has to interactively log in with the identity provider to register the device with the identity provider. So that means for your lab environment, if you want to use this, you will have to touch every single computer. You'll have to register every single computer. And if you ever go through something like a return to service with that computer, if you do a erase in contents and install or the end of a quarter, you're going to have to go back and physically touch every single one again. Is that a good answer?
That sounds like a great answer to walk away, you know.
Yeah. There are improvements that can be made to this process, is I think what the biggest answer is there. And the feedback is not necessarily going to be with your identity provider too. There's only so much that the Microsofts, the Oktas, the Pings, the OneLogins, and the Googles of the world can do about this. A lot of this is based on the actual framework enabled by the operating system.
Gotcha.
Big 10,000-pound gorilla, by the way, in the education market that is not currently in the room is Google. Google has no support for single sign-on. They have no support for platform single sign-on. And as far as I know with the conversations I've had, they have no plans to do anything like that to enable it. We have a question down here in the front. Hey-o.
Is there a good way to test the single sign-on extension?
Yes, there are several things that you can do. First, I would recommend non-production test equipment, which for those of you that have ever seen any of my sessions before, that is the drinking game. So you heard me say it, take a shot. You can very easily test out any of the pieces for single sign-on. It is a two-part process. First, you have to put the companion application onto the device. So for Microsoft, that's going to be the company portal app on macOS. a Microsoft Authenticator on iOS, or on multiple platforms with Okta, it's Okta Verify. And that single sign-on extension does not become alive until you actually add the configuration profile to the device. So you simply throw the config profile at your test device, and then you'll be prompted for registration through the notification center if you're doing this on a Mac, for example. If you're doing this on iOS devices, you usually have to open up the companion application and register and enroll in the process yourself once at least. But it can be deployed out one-to-one type of thing. You can test it out. There's also a couple different ways to determine if a user account has been adopted by platform, where there's some information that ends up in the user local directory, the discal record essentially. So you can go in and look and see something there. And there's also a command called app-sso that will let you see the status of the machine. So if you type, side note by the way, Apple has not updated the man page for that application for at least 2 generations, and I've put in a feedback on that one that has been ignored. But if you type app-sso by itself, it will show you the main help page, and then you'll see the whopping 2 commands you can use in order to see the status of platform single sign-on on the device. It'll spit out a whole ton of information inside there. How much of it's useful yet, I've yet to determine. Question again, rock on.
If a user gets their sessions revoked, they have to go back through and re-sign back into the SSO extension?
Good question. And number one, I would encourage you to go see Michael and Mark's session shortly after this, where they'll actually be showing some videos of these different scenarios here. But one of the things that'll pop up if a user session's revoked is notification center messages. This is it. Everything is based on operating system level, so it all shows up in notification center, which is quite delightfully and easily ignored by end users, if anybody's ever used notification center. Where you go to fix it is actually to go into system preferences, system settings, users and groups, click on your individual username, and you'll actually see a repair or re-authenticate button. There's 2 buttons inside there, so it'll either try to go out and get tokens and give you a bunch of very obscure error messages why you can't, or it will allow you to essentially repair that user account. It's not like fix, it's literally repair it to a account and try to sign as someone else. We have a question down here from our plants in the audience. Hey, whoop. Hey, nice. Well done.
So this is Michael from Microsoft. Just a quick comment on the last one. The repair option is if the initial setup of the device doesn't work successfully. If you have a working device and then you revoke the user session, the next time they try to sign into something that uses SSO, they'll just get a pop-up over the top of the app.
Excellent. And you also get cake if you go to their session too, because there's a lot of cake. I think that's everybody here. If everyone's good, I will be around. I do not turn into a pumpkin once this is done, so I am sure we will have lots of questions afterwards. Feel free to grab me here at the session. Feel free to hit me on Mac Admins. I am Rabbitt on Mac Admins. That's 2 B's, 2 T's. I'm Rabbitt like Eddie, not Rabbit like Easter. And I'm also available on Mastodon to rabbit@furry.engineer. So feel free to hit me up. More than happy. Thank you so much for coming. Please eat cake.